My name is Frank Narducci. I'm the interim superintendent for Chandler Unified School District. I'd like to welcome you and thank you in advance for your input toward Chandler Unified School District's ESSER 3 federal stimulus funding plan. Tonight's meeting will cover a few objectives. We'll review some background information as we review COVID-19 federal stimulus funding. We're also going to review the federal monies received from ESG, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3. Even though ESSER 3 is our main focus, we want you to know how we've arrived where we are. Also, we'll be discussing your priorities as we invest in our students, and then next steps to discuss a timeline to make decisions and investments. To do that, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Lana Berry, Chandler Unified School District's Chief Financial Officer, and she'll start us off this meeting. Lana?
Thank you, Mr. Narducci. Like Mr. Narducci said, my name is Lana Berry. I'm the CFO of Chandler Unified, and I am honored and privileged to explain the information about our federal stimulus dollars and how they impact Chandler Unified School District. So the very first slide that I want to talk about are the three different pots of money that Chandler Unified School District has or will receive from the federal government. The first pot of money was the CARES Act, and the acronym is CARES, and we all refer to it as CARES dollars, and it stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And it was originally the COVID relief package, and it was issued in March 27th, 2020. It was the first pot of money that was released. Then the second pot that was available is the acronym CRRSA Act, and it stands for the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, and that began in December 27th, 2020. And then the last pot of federal stimulus money that all of you have heard about is called ARP, or ARP, and that's the American Rescue Plan, and it was released March 11th, 2021. So those are all three pots of money that have been distributed to schools, and now we're going to explain a little bit about those pots of money. Most of you have heard a lot of acronyms thrown out by us over the last 18 months. The first two that probably pop out quite a bit are what people talk about when they say, what is ESG and what is ESSER or ESSER? So we wanted to explain those because you're going to see those on a lot of slides. You'll see them on a lot of documentation from our school district or when you're reading state reports. The first one, the Enrollment Stability Grant, it stands for and was its purpose was designed to support Arizona's safe reopening of schools with a top priority to provide safe and accessible learning spaces, whether distance or in person, for the 2020-21 academic school year. Now, the Enrollment Stability Grant was started through, it came from the federal government down through the state, through the governor's office, and it helped all of our school districts during the national crisis stabilize our enrollment during a really critical time. As you know, Chandler Unified School District enrollment had declined, just like the state across the boards, enrollment had declined. Nationally, enrollment had to decline. And since funding is based off of student enrollment or attendance, ultimately districts were impacted across the state and the nation. So this is a pot of money to help us during that critical time. Then the other fund called ESSER, that you hear about quite a bit, is, and if you'll back up a slide, I apologize, is the ESSER is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Grant. And this grant provides school districts with emergency relief funds to address the impact of COVID-19 on elementary and secondary schools. Now, those funds are accounted for based on poverty, and school districts across the nation were allocated an amount based on the poverty level of that school district. All right, how are these funds used and how are they allowed to be used? That's important, and it was important for us. While we were allotted a certain allocation, we also had to apply for these grants, and they had to have expenditures that aligned with the allowable usages. So right off the bat, loss of learning opportunities. As we know, students across the nation were impacted by loss of learning. There was ability to assess and monitor student needs. We could use the dollars to actively engage students. We could use it to inform and assist families. Also for facility improvements and repairs, resources we're able to give out to principals and leaders to meet those schools' needs, to meet our mitigation plans. We're able to use those funds to focus on students who are most impacted by the pandemic. And then also we were allowed to use the funds for staff and student supplies for cleaning to make sure that our facilities were prepared and met those mitigation plans. All right, the next area we want to cover is we want to talk about the federal money that we received from, again, the ESSER grant, the ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and the Enrollment Stability Grant. Right off the bat, let's talk about the timeline for those funds. The Enrollment Stability Grant was released in December 30th, 2020. We had to have our application in and we had to have expenditures spent by December of 2020. So it was $14.2 million, and we already had to apply for that and spend those dollars last fiscal year. So that has been finalized and is finished. The ESSER 1 grant was $3.2 million, and it had to be spent all the way up through September 30th, 2022. But that amount we purchased and used immediately to help students and teachers right off the bat. The third fund was ESSER 2, and that was for $13.5 million. Those funds could be used all the way up until September 30th, 2023. Our school district has finalized and spent those dollars all through last fiscal year also. The last fund is ESSER 3, and that's $30.6 million. We have not began to spend that until this fiscal year, and we're going to be finalizing a plan with your input and our staff's input and our students' input over the next few weeks, and then we will apply for the grant in September. We can use those dollars all the way up until September 30th, 2024. Have not started that process to apply yet until we finish our current process, and then we have all the way till September to spend those dollars. So the priorities. I want to address what the national and our CUSD priorities are for our students. So right off the bat, we had access to ESG, ESSER 1, and ESSER 2 dollars. And that started all the way back when the COVID virus began, back in March of 2020. So from March of 2020 all the way through the end of last fiscal year, which would have been June of 2021, our priorities for spending of these three funds included with the Enrollment Stability Grant to support and provide salaries and benefits for transportation, community ed, food and nutrition, and online teachers. And I'm going to explain each one on a slide that will continue after this slide. The ESSER 1 funds were for teacher and student computers specifically, and then the ESSER 2 priority was to support salaries and benefits for our online teachers, to provide for summer school, and to help with professional development. Those were our priorities as we applied for those grants and made our needs throughout our schools and to our community. So the first one, the Enrollment Stability Grant, was $14.2 million. And again, the four areas we spent our money on were, the first one was we paid for teacher salaries for the Chandler Online Academy. We paid for salaries for our community ed staff. We paid for salaries for our food service staff, and we paid for salaries for our transportation staff. So what were some of those outcomes, and why did we have to do that? Well, right off the bat, we had to hire additional online academy staff members. All of our teachers went virtual in March of 2020, but then we had to provide summer school that summer for the very first time with just online teachers. And then the next year, we offered online at a robust environment. And so we had to hire a lot more teachers to meet those needs. So this grant allowed us to hire those staff members so that we could not only meet our virtual environment, but we also could meet our mitigation plans related to when we brought students back. The virtual instruction was critical for our school district, along with everyone in the nation. We had to meet those instructional needs for our students, and that took a lot of money and a lot of help from not only our professional development team, but also the technology resources needed for these teachers and students to be successful. We opened our community education department for essential care workers. We were one of the only ones in the entire state in March of 2020 that opened up a couple sites to be able to allow our front of the line workers, our nurses, our police departments, our first responders to be able to have a place to bring their children so that they could go and impact our community. So we continued with that. We had staff that worked that. However, we weren't charging for that at that time, except for a small amount. So we had a lot of workers to cover those needs, but ultimately the state was not giving us money to cover those salaries. So we used the grant to be able to help us keep our community education departments open. The last part was we provided curbside meals. So that was the last one on the ESG grant. And we were able to immediately open curbside meals for our students and families. They were able to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and also weekend meals. We were able to do that through March and then into the summer. And then we began the brand new year last year of the school year virtually. And we were able to provide, again, breakfast, lunch, and dinner for our students and families across the district. The next grant is our ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, and that was a total of $16.8 million. Majority of those funds were used for Chromebooks and HP Elite books for our teachers and staff so they could provide instruction virtually. And then our ESSER 2 funds were to hire the additional teachers that we needed at the Chandler Online Academy, with about 20% of our students migrating over to the online program. We had a lot of need in that area, and so we had to shift staff and teachers to help in that area. We also had our Summer Academy recovery program last summer, and we were able to serve a lot of students who from March of 2020 through May of 2020 needed some additional help. So we were able to offer free summer school in the summer of 2020 to a number of students across our school district for free. We also paid for community education salaries. We brought on staff to help with before and after school care, but we also had our teachers come back in person before our students came back, and so they were able to have care for their children and also families as they returned to work and needed a safe place for their students or a place to learn, and we were open for school, were able to come and bring their children to our school district also during that period of time. So we were able to pay for staff to cover those needs. With those outcomes, we were able to accomplish a lot of things with the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 dollars. We were able to train our staff to be able to provide great virtual instruction across our district. And so we trained 2,500 teachers to give them some more tools and techniques to help serve their student population. We also were able to engage with 19,000 students, either online with a class, full-time, or summer school, or different ways that they participated in virtual learning. So a number of students were able to participate because of training, because of technology devices that were accessible to them, and then by teachers who were able to provide that virtual training. And the last thing, we were able to also connect some of our students who needed hotspots and weren't able to connect online at home. And that was a great partnership, not only with our district, but with the city of Chandler and a number of partners that helped us with that. All right, the next slide that we're going to go to is going to talk about priorities. So there are a number of priorities that are extremely important. And from the national level, we're going to start discussing the priorities for ESSER 3. Now, these don't really differ too much from ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, but they're very specific. The first one is to have safe in-person schooling. That's probably the most important right off the bat. We also, another priority on the national level is to have student engagement and wellness. That's critical. We know that it's critical for kids to not only be enrolled, but attending every day. That's critical to the best of our ability. Teachers' professional growth is going to be critical across not only CUSD, but the nation, and they want us to make sure we're rewarding working conditions and retention. Academic growth is critical and a priority, and it's going to be measured. We're going to measure before COVID and then after COVID. So that's going to be another priority to find out where we are and how can we help our students get back to that same level of expectations. We also know that we want to focus on equity for all the above students most impacted by the pandemic. Everyone was impacted by COVID, and we want to make sure that all 45,000 of our students we have met those needs of each and every one of those students. So CUSD, we have our priorities, and our priorities specifically are to make sure we ensure a strong classroom instruction. We want to make sure that instruction, no matter if it is in person or if it's virtual, it meets our students' needs. We're going to implement academic recovery and acceleration strategies for each of our students. We want to be able to retain and prepare a stable workforce for the future. We want to innovate and redesign traditional education experiences for long-term success. We also want to make sure we support students' mental and physical health, along with working with our staff to make sure that CUSD is ready for the future. So what are our next steps? There's going to be a timeline that we're going to discuss to make these decisions about the investments that we will be making in the future. So ESSER 3 has a couple criteria. One of the criteria is that you have to take, of the $30.6 million, you are required to take 20% of that for learning loss. That could be summer learning, extended day learning, comprehensive after school programs, extended day school year, or school day interventions. The other portion can be focused on all of those priorities that we discussed before, but 20% has to be on loss of learning. So how do we go forward? What are our next steps? Well, the LEA, which is the Local Education Association, or Local Education Agency, must engage in meaningful consultation with our stakeholders. So that is one of the reasons we had a meeting on July 14th with our board, and that is another reason we're having a meeting tonight, and then we'll have more input over the next couple of weeks before we apply for the grant. We are also required to give back feedback every 6 months, so that will be something that you can expect to see from us and hear from us as, on the feedback of how ESSER 3 is going and the impact it has on our district. Stakeholders that should be included are our students, which Mr. Narducci will be holding a student forum when he has a superintendent's council, when he comes together with students from all different schools. We also are engaging tonight, you as family members or sometimes as educators. We will also be reaching out over the next week to our certified classified administration staffs to give input for their input on our current plan. All right, so there's a couple other pieces of criteria that have to happen with the ESSER 3 local education agency plan. We must make sure that's in an understandable format and that it is in a language that parents can understand. So we will publish it on our website so that people can access it, review it, and see it in a format that we think will be easy to understand. Our public relations department will be posting this presentation this week on our website. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Narducci.
Thank you, Ms. Sperry. I'd like to talk with you next about the 10 potential strategies that we're recommending as a district. There's a lot that falls within these 10 strategies. So if you want to take a camera shot of this and not wait for it, you're also going to be providing input on these 10 strategies. But I'm going to list them now, and then I'll go into each one and provide some examples. So our first strategy is formative-driven assessment and data analysis to determine individual students impacted by unfinished learning. Our second strategy, K-12 intervention through a multi-tiered system of support for our students. Our third strategy, targeted intensive tutoring. The fourth, extended learning. The fifth, academic outreach through before and after school programming. The sixth, professional development. The seventh, increased student access to blended learning through increasing technology devices and connectivity. The next, K-12 site-based data and instructional strategy coaches at each of our schools to assist teachers. The ninth, staffing for high-intensity intervention models at specific school sites. And the 10th, COVID-19 mitigation priorities via resources, staffing, and facility renovations. I know that's a lot, so I'm going to go into each one a little more in depth. The first potential strategy that we discussed was formative-driven assessment and data analysis to determine our individual students impacted by unfinished learning and acceleration. These are supports for teachers at our sites to be able to use site-based data, which we have plenty of, and we have databases where they can be accessed for them to be able to see that data and be able to see which parts of the data specifically identify areas of concern with student learning. These would be academic strategies that our coaches would be able to assist our teachers with at that site. Also, we were looking at as an example in this area to update school city reports and assessments. School city is an assessment system that we have. It's a formative assessment system that we use K-12. Teachers utilize assessments and content that are in School City to be able to get a snapshot of where student learning is so that they can guide their instruction or modify their instruction even. And then teacher training, really important when we're looking at data and assessments. Where do I start? And now that I know that information, what do I do next? And I would say that some teachers need a little more assistance in what do I do next so that I can really form my instruction based on what is it really that provides the best learning for my students based on the data sets that I just reviewed. That's formative driven assessment and data analysis. The examples would be to provide supports for our teachers to not only utilize the data, but to also the impact of the data on instruction. The next strategy is a K-12 intervention support materials to support classroom teachers and their students through a multi-tiered system of support. This is through materials and curriculum, and examples can be seen as K-12 math screeners. A math screener would provide a red flag in an area of concern. This would provide additional information for teachers to provide additional and small group instruction. And again, this would be K-12 to be able to hit the area of concern at the discovery of the concern and not to wait for a period of time where a student may ask for help. But these would be pre-screeners that would assist the teacher in seeing which students need to have additional instruction during the unit or during the lesson. We'd also be looking at example of a K-12 screener that supports student learning prerequisite skills to learn. These are areas where we can pinpoint what is a student missing in a learning strategy that they may need, or what didn't they get to fill that gap. So this type of screener helps us to provide skills to students that promote learning when we identify that skill as missing in a student. And also another example in intervention supports for the multi-tiered system of support can be seen in a 712 intervention and acceleration materials and licenses. Why we say intervention and acceleration is we're looking at this as unfinished learning for a lot of our students, and it's not always filling the gap for our students, but it's also looking at the rigor and the acceleration that our students need to get to their next projected level as well. This would include spending in the area of licenses for instruction and licenses for student practice. Those all fall under examples for K-12 intervention supports and materials to support our classroom teachers and their students through a multi-tiered support system at the point of discovery and not waiting until a gap forms. The next area that we'd like to cover is targeted intensive tutoring. These are for students who need additional assistance. An example of this would be on-demand tutoring with an extended space and time. We know that some of our students don't start their schoolwork right after school. They may need early morning help, they may need after practice help, or they may need after work help. So we're looking at extending the space and time that they have access to tutoring. In most schools across the nation, unfortunately, students only have access to tutoring when teachers at school. We are looking at a targeted intensive tutoring plan that would open that up to anywhere, anytime. These would also be provided by certified teachers so that we know that the quality of instruction is solid. We would also look at high-level classes included where we can have unfinished learning or access to students who need that additional help when they're doing their work through AP, which our advanced placement and our IB programs. These would also include recorded lessons so that students could go back to a tutoring session and review it multiple times. In addition, we would maximize our personalized learning because it would be specific to the student's need, and they would be able to engage with the tutoring session based on what they're really experiencing difficulty with at that time, not waiting till the next day to go to school to state that they're having a difficulty. Many of the services provided by a third party. Understanding and realizing that our teachers go through an extended day and are exhausted in the evening and aren't accessible to students anytime in an expended space or time. So this would be a third party that would be pre-approved and well vetted to provide our tutoring services. And then the bonus of the targeted intensive tutoring strategy would be that our students would have digital access anytime, anywhere. It may be when a student is doing work and they're not at home, but they have digital access. They may be on vacation, have digital access, or they may be at school and have digital access to anytime, anywhere tutoring. Those are examples of what our targeted intensive tutoring strategy could look like. Our next strategy is extended learning. Examples of this are to extend students' learning outside of the traditional school day. These most often take place during intersession breaks, before or after school, during tutoring time, which we talked about prior, during the summer academy that Mrs. Berry talked about that we have provided free to students, and then also in-person and digital access, meaning that our students could be extending their learning in person right at school with digital access to additional strategies and additional skill-based development. In extended learning, we are doing just that. It's not a need for every student, but for those students that need it, we want to provide that access. That's the potential strategy of extended learning. Another strategy is academic outreach through clubs before and after school programming as well. So examples of that are to increase our before and after school offerings. These offerings would be provided to our students at low cost or no cost. We want these activities to be high interest to students so that they're highly engaging. And then to find that information out, we would want to provide a survey to students and parents to see what offerings are needed at specific schools based on their feedback. We'd also look at enhanced exposures to quality off-site programming and activity, such as students having access to the Science Center, to the Music Museum, etc. These exposures to learning promote learning and provide learning sets for students as well. Most of these academic outreach through clubs and before after school program would occur at the elementaries and some at the junior highs, as our high schools already have many activities and offerings on their campuses already. So this strategy would be specific to engaging our students to low cost or no cost programming, which would extend learning. Another strategy that we feel is very important is professional development for our staff. The areas that we're focusing on are data analysis that guides intentional instruction and high-yield classroom teaching and learning strategies. We feel that if we can focus on the high-yield learning strategies, we work smarter and more efficiently and connect kids to learning and filling gaps while addressing unfinished learning in a quicker modality. Examples of this could be enhancing math practices. We feel the need and strong need to enhance math practices across our K-12. This would be ensuring that students are connected to the rigor that Chandler Unified School District provides, while addressing some students who may have been in rigorous coursework where they may have missed an area of learning in the unfinished learning component, as well as filling gaps where students just aren't getting the information. Also extending our partnerships with community colleges and universities. We do that with Maricopa County Community Colleges through an AMP program and an M program. These are math programming where college staff teams up with our teachers, both at the junior high and elementary levels, to work with our teachers in teaching math strategies so that highly qualified math units are taught and mentored, and our students receive the best in instruction, as well as connectivity towards assessments and showing their strategies learned. We're also working with teaching struggling readers. Some may have heard of this as teaching reading effectively, or TRE, but teaching struggling readers has been essential professional development that will guide all of our teachers, especially at the elementary levels, to make sure that we are working with all readers becoming fluent readers. And that target date is really third grade, to make sure that fluency is captivated with all of our early learners. But we still have to go back in junior highs and in the upper grades at elementary to ensure that we pick up any areas where there may be gaps. And so to read content well, they really need to have our basic reading strategies and skills that they may have missed along the way. Also, turning student assessment data into evidence-based practice. I said that before in a prior slide. Now that I know, what do I do? And so we want to really help guide our teachers by having a person there to assist them with, how do I turn this assessment data now into evidence-based strategies and practices that really make a difference in student learning. And then our last example of a strategy in professional development is blended learning. If we're going to utilize technology as a future-ready device for our students to be able to feel comfortable with and to be able to help maneuver their learning to higher degrees and in more rigorous ways, we need to assist our teachers in how to provide a blended learning environment where they're learning in person, as well as on devices that help them to engage after school, on weekends, and during intersessions. That blended learning will rely on devices and will rely on our teachers being able to provide curriculum units that blend that learning for our students K through 12. That's our strategy of professional development, areas that we would see examples to grow on. Another strategy is to increase student access to the blended learning inside and outside of the classroom through increased technology devices and connectivity. This strategy is pretty simple. It's anytime, anywhere learning. As we move towards future-ready strategies, which is a big area that we're working on this year in preparing our Journey 2030 strategic plan, anytime, anywhere learning is really important because our students are connected to learning in that way and are engaged. So we want to get away from our just in-seat class time is where you learn, for them to be able to connect. This would require additional devices. As Mrs. Berry said, we don't have all the devices that are needed, but some of the funding here could be used as a strategy to purchase additional devices so our students would have them. Digital content and content creation would need to occur, meaning we have digital content now, but we would need an increase because anytime, anywhere learning will need to be supported by building data banks of digital content, and also content creation, which would be created by our staff here at district office through our instructional our instructional technology folks that coach and create our documents. Also through professional development, one of the big areas that we have started is blended learning at junior highs, but this would be extended both ways to our elementary schools as well as to our high schools. And then we have a learning management system, which is an LMS, but as we're utilizing that more, we're going to need to have an expansion to the LMS to be able to handle that amount of content and uploads, as well as the additional use by our students. We're also going to have to look at the increased access and connectivity for our students through hotspots in this strategy. We do have hotspots for our students to be connected, but when we're looking at anytime, anywhere, there may be some students that do not have access to networks that we will have to manage, and we will have to provide resources to be able to do so. And those are some examples under increasing students' access to blended learning through devices and technology connectivity. Another strategy that you'll be giving us input on is a K-12 evidence-based practices and data coaches. These are non-evaluated site support at each of our schools, and we'll be able to offer that through 2024. That's when the ESSER fund does end. but we have to make sure that we plan through 2024 so that we are congruent through that year with the services that we're providing. So examples of that would be the onboarding and training of our site coaches, and that would take place in 2021. These coaches would be identified from school sites as teachers who have really excelled in the area of teaching and learning and are getting results. Also, these coaches would be individuals who can highly engage with individuals on their staff to be able to work with them. And as the coach term implies, they would coach and also model for teachers those instructional strategies that are most utilized to get results. The number of coaches would be based on the school site. For example, a large high school may have 4 to 5 coaches at their site, so they are available and accessible by teaching teams as well as departments. Our junior highs may have 1 or 2 coaches so that they can rotate through, provide professional development, and be able to meet with teachers to make sure that they're feeling comfortable and in the practices that they're utilizing. And in elementaries, that number could vary from 1 to 2 based on the size of the school. These coaches would be trained up on student assessment data and identify instructional gaps or areas for acceleration for our students. So they would work with the schools specifically in school teams on which assessment data is most essential to utilize, identifying those areas of gaps, and then helping them to understand strategies and skills and curriculum to fill those gaps or to accelerate students as well. Our district curriculum instruction coaches will be trained using effective coaching models, high yield instructional strategies, which we know nationwide are narrowed down for us through our research and models. And then also alignment to personalized learning, which is part of our Future Ready Journey 2030. So we'd be using our current instructional coaches that are hired by our district and that work with our schools every day, and they would be doing the training of these site coaches so that the site coaches are at their sites and hands-on full-time. We would then look at those instructional rounds, which are so much valued to provide feedback to sites. All of our instructional coaches would provide administration and teachers with feedback at their sites, things that they're doing well, assessment data that is moving in the right direction, or areas that we may need to hone in on and do a little better. As we said, this is a 2-year cycle for our coaches that are at the sites, so they will be working with the sites for 2 years. And it's our target that at the end of 2024 for those coaches then to go back into their classroom instruction and then to hold as a stipend the position to be able to ensure that we have sustainability moving forward. We strongly feel in this strategy that our teachers would get the support they need over 3 years, and then that we would have the strength of having our trained coaches at the sites at a stipend rate to be able to assist and to be able to answer questions and to be able to be extra instructional leaders on the campus as well. Our next strategy is staffing for a high intensity intervention models. Examples of intervention models could be academic specialists at a specific school that needs more assistance, a co-teacher that can work with a classroom or grade level that has specific intervention work that's been targeted and that need further assistance. Also included in this model could be a counselor or interventionist to help a school or the school population where they struggle, or paraprofessionals to support learning within classrooms or among grade levels. And then the other part would be our site-based instructional coaches would also offer the high intensity intervention models while they're working with staff as well, as they would be additional positions on that campus during the 2 years that they are working with staff to coach up these strategies and data assessment pieces. So those are examples of potential strategies under high intensity intervention models. All of these models include additional staffing for sites that are identified in need. And the last strategy to address COVID-19 mitigation priorities via resources, staffing, and facility renovations. An example of those would be to assess Wi-Fi and network infrastructure to support the virtual learning. Every model we talked about increases our blended learning to be future ready and for our students to have additional access to technology devices. We would need additional funding to go in and make sure teachers have connectivity and that we limit the frustration by individuals, whether it be students learning or teachers teaching, by having networks dropped or applications not available to them. Also, the installation of additional PPE enhancements where needed at school sites. We would also like to look at, as an example, hiring additional staff at sites to meet additional mitigation requirements. Also, our health offices are doing a lot of communications right now with parents, based on our Maricopa County community health programming that has required us to do quarantining. There's a lot of assistance that our health offices need. And so we're looking at our large schools, individuals to help make those calls and to be able to assist with our mitigation strategies on that point. Also, to address unfinished learning, we may call that gaps, we may call it accelerated, but to assist unfinished learning, whether it be priorities in tech labs or access to digital devices. Additional staffing may be also needed above the allocated student-to-teacher ratios to assist, and retention and referral stipends for employees. As many of you may know, not only across Arizona, but across the nation, schools are having a difficult time in attracting and retaining employees based on the work that is being done and the mitigation strategies that have been put in effect the last year and a half. And so we want to be able to assist our individuals by getting, by identifying areas like transportation, food services, childcare, paras in the classroom, teachers, retention referral stipends for our employees to keep a well qualified workforce as well as to retain them. Those are potential strategies under addressing COVID-19 mitigation priorities via resources, staffing, and facility renovations. The last slide I'd like to discuss with all of you in attendance is the process and the journey we've been on. So on July 14th, 2021, we held a study session with our board. At that study session, pretty much what was discussed by Mrs. Berry was discussed there. We went on to create the stakeholder input meeting of tonight, which is August 30th. And then we are going to then hold another input session by September 3rd of 2021 for our staff survey and stakeholders to gain insight. On September 10th, 2021, we're going to be applying for the ESSER 3 grant, which will allow us to look at the input, see where the focal points are, and then to further delineate the strategies in that area and share them out again so that you're well aware of the strategies that are being used and then also our outcomes intended. Again, I want to thank you for listening to the information.